might be a few months before we get to see each other, so thank you. I will just apologise as well for Patrick. He did mention that due to some personal circumstances, he might not be here for all of the meeting, might be slightly late. So you've just got me. So hi everyone, I'm new to dispatch chairing. This is my first one, so go easy on me. I'm Kirsty Payne from UK NCSC, and it's very exciting to be chairing in a virtual setting. Yeah, great to be here. So we'll get started. We've got a really packed agenda for today. Just to start with, to remind you of a note well, so for many of you, this will be your first IETF session of the week, or it might be your first IETF session ever. So people tend to skip over this slide, but because we're early in the week, I'd just like to remind you of all the various processes and IETF policies that we have. Any IETF contribution, if that's verbal in a meeting, and there's a whole range of what contributions mean, it is covered by this kind of set of processes and documents of how you should behave, and code of conduct and patterns and stuff like that. So by participating, you should have read all this stuff, but just to remind you. Okay. And to remind you that this session is being recorded. It might be your first virtual session in IETF, so use a headset. If you need to add yourself to the queue, then please add yourself to the queue. You can raise hands, keep yourself muted unless you are speaking. You don't have to worry about blue sheets, they're automatically taken thanks to the Meet Echo tool. And you can have chats as you are in Jabber, that's great, but if you're rounding on an important point, please think about bringing that to the queue. So we have notes being taken. We also have Jabber, and if you're unsure of how any of the Meet Echo stuff happens or what's going on, pop something in the chat, the folks are around to help. There's also the participant guide if you're stuck on how the tools work. Okay, so welcome to Dispatch. It's our virtual meeting. It's nice to see you all here. We've got a very packed agenda, so split it into two parts. As you know, we cover the art general area as well. So to start with, we'll just go through and look at the agenda and welcome everyone in. We've got date and time on the internet first, then media types, content types, and related terminology, then some HTTP content negotiation using profiles. And for the second part of the agenda, we have the art area. So this is not topics to be dispatched, but just general topics of interest and a time to kind of air the views and air your technologies. So we've got APN as the first slot, then QLog, STP mapping, and SIP extensions after that. As you'll see, we leave 0 minutes for AOB. All times are UTC as well, so just whatever time zone you're in, please adjust to that. Cool. And as a reminder, we have mailing lists, art topics and dispatch topics discussed on those various lists. So I'll just pause here in case anyone has an agenda bash to make. Please add yourself to the queue or any questions about the session this morning. Okay, right, let's crack on then. So first dispatch topic of today is date and time on the internet. So yeah, I'll be driving the slides for you, but if you just, I think, add yourself to the queue, and then we can get talking.
Hello, am I audible to everyone? I hope I am.
Yeah, you are. You're a bit quiet, but I can hear you.
That might be my headphones. And I've requested a screen share. Wait, I can. Would you work the slides, or can I share my screen?
I'll drive the slides for you. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So hello, everyone. And let's talk about date and time on the internet. I'm Ujwal. I work at this consultancy called Igalia, and if you find that easier to pronounce, you can call me Riza Kukin. So can you progress the slides, please?
Okay, so before you asked, I am a member and a delegate for ECMATC 39, the committee that is tasked with standardizing JavaScript, and there's a bunch of cool people
Well, the audio just got very strange. I don't know if you changed something when I advanced the slide.
Is this better?
No, it's still quite distorted.
Okay. Let's switch to the headphones then. Just a second.
Okay, it's now silent. I don't know if you're expecting to be. Meet echo suggests that might be a broken mic.
I did a test call with him a couple of hours ago, and it worked fine in Jitsi, but that doesn't mean anything. Well, excuse me.
Okay, what about now?
Much better.
Oh, okay. Okay, so specifically inside of TC39, I'm a part of the Temporal Champions group, which is a group that has been tasked specifically with standardizing an update to the JavaScript date object, which is a constant pain point. So we've been working on a modern ergonomic API for building date and time applications on the internet. And there's a bunch of really cool people in this subgroup as well. Would you progress the slides? Okay, so what is so special about Temporal? I am a little biased, maybe you could say, but we have come upon something which is a modern ergonomic API. It addresses some of the longstanding weaknesses, and we use 3239 as the base interchange format for the different objects that we use. We also have first-class time zone support and first-class calendar support for the different APIs, which is something of a first in our space, which means that now we have different objects which have time zones and calendars inside of the data model. And then you could ask, well, how does one persist that? How does one persist a time zone that is attached to a date time or a timestamp? Could you please progress the slides? Okay, so this is the standard timestamp as one might expect according to 3239. And if you progress the slides, you would see that the time zone conundrum is a special one. It's a special one because fortunately or unfortunately, we are not the first group of people to come upon this problem. 3239 and the underlying ISO standard 8601 allows absolute offset from UTC, but many applications all over the internet work in the context of what one may call a human time zone. And of course, you need to encode the timestamp for persistence or for interchange inside a database, or to just round trip across clients. And you could ask, well, what is a human time zone? Is it a time zone that is included in the list of time zones by ANA, or is it as specified by Unicode? And well, the group of people that came across this problem includes people from developing applications all over, right? There's Java, which built a similar API. There's Linux tools like Date. There's databases, and then there's calendar applications. So if you progress the slides, you would see that now it's common even on the internet to come across a timestamp quite like this. Now it's my local time zone, but you could see that apart from the time zone, there's a suffix that includes an identifier for my time zone. If you progress the slides, there is another variant which includes the IANA time zone, and the next one would be this, and this is, I believe, a format that is quite popular at this point. Now, the previous ones are especially popular in the database spaces, but this is something that I feel many people have encountered in the wild, even though it is something that is not in the standards track. So if you move ahead, the question is, are we done? And the answer is, unfortunately, not quite. This format, first of all, was never standardized. Java or whoever first came across this just move ahead with this without ever sanitizing it. And of course, one of the big problems is that there's so much more information that can be encoded. For us specifically in temporal, calendars are a big priority. So we need calendars for all of these things. I'm sorry. And what else? We can have CLDR time zones. We can have different numbering systems. We can even have timescales. So there is, in fact, a need for a generalized format that provides people a way to format extensions in a way that is agreed upon and generalized, instead of just coming up with ad hoc designs that don't play along well with each other, possibly. And there's also a need for a process to specify these keys, these different information, pieces of information that can be added, and the list of acceptable values. So if you move ahead, this is something close to what we came upon. I changed the time in the, okay. So on the left, you would see what we usually see, but towards the end, there's another piece of information, and this is a tag that includes a more generalized form of including any information in the timestamp. So moving ahead, we could see that temporal could utilize this format to have its own extended version of 3239 strings, and so we can use this to express what the calendar is like. But hypothetically, ideally, one could use this to include any information. So if you move ahead, yeah, so this is a link back to the draft that I came up with. We tried as TC39 to share observations with IETF to upstream, one could say, this format to the standards track. We tried to keep folks from CalConnect, which is the liaison for ISO, in the loop. The goal was to standardize generalized and optional extensions, as well as modernize 3239, which is gone out of sync, one could say, with the underlying ISO 8601, with things like extended years syntax, and also deprecating the fallback that allows 2 or 3 digits years. We were trying to also standardize a mechanism for registering these keys, quite similar to how BCP 47 does. And we've been working simultaneously with Unicode folks for coming up with a U namespace for these things, so that, you know, time zones as well as calendars as specified by the Unicode consortium could work. Moving ahead, we the question now is, how do we move ahead with this, right? We brought our findings to the CalX working group, as well as CalConnect, which happen to be the two sort of big bodies that deal with these changes in this space, right? We authored a draft, which with the express goal of obsoleting 3239 with these optional extensions. So of course, everything that is accepted right now is still accepted. And we included updates with these optional extensions. There was some pushback, understandably, to obsoleting 3239. And so now I've tried to split the updates into another draft so that that could be accepted individually, and then these extensions could live on as an add-on. The question that now we're grappling with is, can both be accepted? And if they can, then by which working group specifically? And do we even have a working group that deals with this, or do we need a new one? And that's it. If you progress to the next slide. Thank you for having me here. That's it.
Great, thank you for your presentation. So we've got time now for discussion. I've seen there's a lot of Jabber chat going on. Any kind of, if we focus on the dispatch questions here as well, do we think this work is valuable, belongs in the IETF, and where would it go? Where should it go? So I can see I've got Pete in the queue. Off you go.
We have to see if all this stuff works. Yes. Morning. So first, one quick question, which is, does anybody have a sense of what CalExt thought of this? Like, what direction did the discussion go in there?
My personal impression was that it was really positive, but I think Braun can add more to that.
Yeah, as CalExt chair, I'll pop in to comment on that. Assuming you can hear me. It's telling me attention. We're not detecting audio, but I think that's because I wasn't talking to start off with. Thanks, Signal. All right. Positive to the idea with some caveats of this is complex. We probably want to spend some time talking about it, but very negative to the idea of obsoleting RFC 3339 and defining a complete format that included everything. So the idea is, yes, we can do this work, but let's leave 3339 by itself so that places where there's just a timestamp with nothing else can stay like that.
Okay, and so that brings me to question 2, which is, can you give an example of where such a thing would be used to express a time? I understand for calendars, like expressing ongoing things, and that makes sense. But for expressing a single time, why is it important to mention the locality beyond
It's
the
to
current
maintain the
offset from
context with it.
UTC?
So if a time came from somewhere, it was within a particular calendar system when it was generated. Maintaining that context allows you to know this was a time in, like, it happened at 9 a.m. context, rather than it happened
So
at
you might be hanging
9
on to
a.m. in plus
you might
10.
be looking back at something and saying,
Yeah, and want to retain that context through whatever else you're doing.
Okay, no, that works for me. Thanks.
Okay, Carlston, you're next in the queue.
Yes, thank you. So in the Jabber room, I already pointed out that in the CBOR working group, which is actually meeting in the next slot, we have a draft defining a CBOR tag for time. Now, CBOR already has 2 tags for time, one for RFC 5339 times and one for POSIX times. But it has turned out that we need more detail in time. So there is a time tag 1001 that defines a few more properties of times, and that is now growing a bit according to requirements that other people have. So in essence, what's happening is that we are defining a little information model for time, and I'm wondering how we can make sure that what we define actually works well with what other people are doing in this space. So we would be very interested in making sure this is all well coordinated.
Yeah, I'm all up for coordination. I think we could touch base once this session is over, and we could discuss that.
Okay, thanks. Daniel, you're next in the queue. DKG, can't hear you. I can see you, but no audio. I'll give you a sec. If nothing else, folks, this is a good time to test out your audio so you join the queue with questions. Just getting background noise now. DKG, still can't hear you. Sorry. Shall I skip ahead and just get Harold for a second? I think you were just going to ask what was in the Java chat, right? So I can relay it for you. Was you said you don't understand what the recipient calendaring system should do if it sees a conflicting UTC offset and IOANA label. So I guess that's the question you were going to ask.
I was focusing on Meet Echo, but I could just jump on Jabber Chat in a second and answer that. That's okay.
Yeah, or answer the question now if you have immediate thoughts on it.
read up on the message, but let me just give me a second. About the IANA time zones changing over time, if I'm correct.
It's just if the recipient calendaring system has a conflict with the UTC offset and the IANA label. Do you know what it should do?
I see. Yeah, the UTC offset is supposed to be the source of truth in those matters. The labels and any additional information is something that can be used by the client to implementation, you could say, to process additional information, right? Additional context, but it's not necessary to take those into account. And maybe there'd be a bunch of implementations that don't even care about them, right? If they're not doing any localization, or if they're not dealing directly with any humans, if they're doing timestamps or things like that.
Cool, thank you. We've got a couple more in the queue. So Harold, you next.
So I glanced through the document, and one of the things that I wondered about was you import wholesale the extension space of BCP47 single character labels. And why? Why do you want all that crap? I see why you could want X, but why do you import a whole thing?
I think we might have been biased initially because we were in talks with the Unicode folks who authored BCP47. I was mostly looking for an extensible way to generalize this format without having to write down as part of the RFC the different key values that are acceptable. And I thought it would be really hard to add to that set if one had to do a new RFC every time. So that was the mechanism that was suggested to us as a way to make it low overhead, to introduce new pieces of information. But I'd be happy to replace that with something which is maybe of a lower overhead or something like that.
I would possibly argue the opposite, that the overhead of defining new stuff is far too low when you use that mechanism. And that the risk you have is that people start using crap or stuff that has been registered in that namespace without even bothering to tell you how it's supposed to be interpreted in the context of dates. I mean, if you want interoperability, you don't want the bar to be low.
I see.
I just connect here because I'd be keen to kind of focus on the dispatch questions here. So we might be getting just a bit more into the detail of the work. So if I'd encourage people to come to the queue. We've just got a couple of minutes left on the agenda. It's very packed today. So I can see some Java chats on opinions on the dispatch questions. So how do we move ahead with this work? It sounds like there's at least interest in it. So keen to hear views from participants on what we do with the dispatch question. Harold, if you have a view on that'd be great. Otherwise, I'll move on in the queue.
I think we need to have careful consideration. So I'd support a working group. I think it needs more consideration than AD sponsored will bring. Okay,
thank you. John, you're next in the queue.
Yeah, I partly just want to agree with what Harold said because I didn't know he was going to say it. But this involves enough complexity that it likely needs a working group, and to add one more piece of complexity to the list, which may motivate the working group idea further. I'm getting a little worried about a different time synchronization problem, which is a IETF standard, possibly with different sets of definitions and namespace and an ECMA standard and a JavaScript standard, or Java standard, and an ISO standard. And if they are all different, or even several of them are different, we end up in a very strange, very space sometimes referred to as the nice thing about standards is there's so many things, so many of them to choose from, and we really don't want to go there if we can avoid it. Thank you.
Idea is for us in ECMAScript to put this to try to get this into IETF in whichever way is most acceptable to IETF folks, and then change the format that we are using to that, and also normatively reference that IETF standard so that we don't have to actually maintain this ad hoc standard.
Well, that sounds like a perfectly good idea, except that ECMAScript is not the international standard. The ISO document is the international standard, and I'm concerned, as I said in the chat, that you're not coordinating with ISO.
Okay.
We don't need to resolve this now, but it is an argument for a working group rather than a small cluster of people.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, sorry, I'm going to cut it here because we do have a really full thing today. I'm seeing people posting on Jabber, kind of a general agreement that a working group is what's needed, but we'll take a final decision on the list. I'm also conscious that Patrick's not here, so I'd be keen to obviously make the decision with my co-chair as well. So we'll just say thank you at this time for your presentation. We'll take it to the list, and I think there is also a sort of mini charter for this. So I'd encourage folks to head over to the list. The link to the messages is in the agenda, and just kind of read through and see if that seems like a BOF would be the next most appropriate step. Okay, thank you, Ujwal. Okay, so our next presentation is from Carsten. Take it away.
Hi, thank you. So this slide is mostly to show that I have larger characters than you have. Next slide. So thank you. So the question that is coming up when editing documents that use media types is, what do the various terms that we are using actually mean? So I have met people who, when I talk to them about media types, tell me text is a media type. Other people tell me text/plain is a media type. And another group of people is telling me text/plain semicolon charset equals UTF-8 is a media type. Now that's probably not a bad thing in casual conversation, but it really starts to become a problem when you are writing specifications. Next slide, please. And we have that problem not just in the area of terminology. We also have it in the term of actual ABNF that describes what these various names actually mean. So it would be nice to actually consolidate. Can you go to the next slide? To actually consolidate the terminology we are using in this space, and also the ABNF that we are using. I know it cannot be consolidated perfectly because, of course, we have lots of existing systems that are slightly, subtly different. But it would be nice to just have something that can be referenced from new documents. And this observation came up while writing a draft in the core working group, where it would have been nice to just point to something, but there are 10 things you can point to, and none of them actually defines all the things that are needed. And there are lots of RFCs that use these terms in different ways as well. So next slide. I started writing a little document that actually defines some terms, so that makes a difference between a media type and a media type name. It defines another term called content type, which is a media type name plus parameters. And it also addresses some things that are probably more specific to core, like content format numbers and content format strings, which are content types combined with a content coding. We like to give these things numbers. So 11050, for instance, is application/JSON in deflate content coding. Next slide. So yeah, I wrote that draft thinking that we could simply decide this in the core working group. But then, of course, we are writing a specification that tries to define terms that touch just about everything that is in the application area, applications and real-time area of the IETF and probably things beyond that. So I was reminded that core is not really chartered for this kind of work, and also that this work would probably benefit from broader discussion and consensus. So yeah, I was looking, is there a working group that actually this would fit naturally into? And we didn't quite find one. So I'm calling on the wisdom of the crowd of this working group here. I'm genuinely looking for advice how to get a document like this both written, but more importantly agreed between the various groups that actually are using media types and related concepts like content types and content formats. So please dispatch.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. Okay, so I'll open up the queue. I can see we've already got Mark Nottingham in the queue. Ask away.
So many buttons to press. Can you hear me?
We can hear and see you.
Lovely. Okay. Hi, Karsten. So I think that my first blush reaction to this is that aligning the terminology is a wonderful thing to embark upon. The terminology in this area has always bugged me. It's imprecise and massively confusing to people who are new to this. However, when you get to the bits about defining A, B, and F and high-level concepts like content coding and so forth, between different protocols that use it, I get really concerned because these protocols have evolved in different directions, and sometimes it's for good reasons, sometimes that's through happenstance, but they each define their own footprint of interoperability. So I don't see the value, and I see a lot of risk in aligning at that layer. So if you restricted this to the terminology, I'd be very excited. Beyond that, I'm concerned, and especially since we have just finished working group last call on HTTP core, the opportunity for adjusting things like A, B, and F in HTTP is probably past. I think that the terminology is safe to do because at first glance, and I'm sure Julian will at some point correct me, I don't think we talk deeply about things like media types and media subtypes and use that kind of terminology in HTTP itself. That's usually for applications who use HTTP who need to use that kind of terminology. How do I stop this? I press buttons again.
So the clarification may be that this is not supposed to change existing protocols, of course. So HTTP is going to stay the way it is, mail is going to stay the way it is, and so on. But it would still be useful to have a document that can be referenced in case you don't have any specific tie-ins to those existing ecosystems. And if you think this should be done in core, that would be fine with me. We just need this, and of course we could do it in the documents that actually use it. But I think doing the ABNF separately in a separate document has a better reuse value.
Sorry, I had to click more buttons. I think that's reasonable, although I think in the same way that we ask people when they define new HTTP methods to put them in separate documents so they don't look like they're application specific, I'd ask you to break the terminology out into a separate document, because that is, I think, more universal and more referenceable. And if you lump it in with the ABNF, people are going to get confused about the relationship.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pete, you're next in the queue.
I'm wondering what's missing in RFC 2046 with regard to terminology here.
Well, it certainly doesn't define terms such as content format and content format string, because those were invented 10 years later.
Well, sure, yeah. But I mean, media type, top-level media type, subtypes are all in there. It sounds like you want to add on to this, which is fine, I guess, but let's be clear about what pieces you actually need to add and not invent new stuff.
Okay, thank you.
As for where this should go, I have a hard time even believing this needs a particular working group. I mean, especially for the terminology. This is seeming pretty straightforward to me and something that could be done as an individual submission or AD sponsored.
Okay, thank you. Cullen, you're next.
Hi, is this working?
We can hear you.
Okay. So I think it's unclear how much what you want to do here is clarify terminology and how much what you want to do is extend this mechanism to something much more than it currently is. And both of those seem like reasonable things to discuss. But when I read the documents, I think actually the core documents that define this stuff, which are not the ones you reference, are the ones like that define the IANA registry, are pretty crisp. So I think that you need to show there actually is a terminology problem and get a little bit more down on that, and what needs to be clarified in the terminology is one thing. And then separate out the parts that are the extensions. Now, the extension parts, I note that a lot of this we've done as BCPs in the past in an apps area working group. I don't see a problem with that. It needs to be heavily coordinated with music and other groups. But I think that this is this looks very much like, hey, write me a blank check to go extend this in a very undefined way, and I haven't really settled my Ds yet. And so I'm actually don't think this is ready for dispatch.
What would you like to see to get it ready for dispatch? Proposed charter or more discussion on list? Or
I'd like to see a crisp separation of what's wrong with our current terminology, and let's update those BCPs that did those terminologies. That work could probably be done much the same way the BCPs were, as one thing, and that's purely a terminology thing. And then the second thing would be extensions. And if we're doing extensions, then we should be very crisp where, why, what the scope and who uses them, what other things have to support them, because lots of things have to support every change we make to this area. And I think that would have to be done pretty carefully before we could charter a working group in that space, and that would probably need a working group.
okay,
So when you talk about extensions, what exactly do you mean?
Well, there's several things here that do not seem to be defined by the current IANA registry or fit into that current thing. So my question is, when I say extensions, what do I mean? I don't know, but that's what do you mean, right? Like.
Yeah, so the only thing that's new is this content format string concept.
And you're claiming that doesn't change the syntax of anything on the wire. That's purely just a reference. That's just a label to a concept that already exists. Is that what the?
Yes. Well, actually, it would be a way to refer to these things without them being registered. So you don't need a registration for every combination of content coding and content type that you need.
Okay, and you don't see that as a very dramatic change of the way we do that?
Well, nobody is using something like this yet, so it's not an extension of existing things. It's something that new things like the CNML extension that proposes to use this could use. So it's a new thing. It's not an extension.
Well, I do think to me is an extension, so maybe I misused that a little bit or whatever, but I think that this was not coming clear from the whole, the part that was the terminology and the part that was something new seemed hard to figure out exactly what was being proposed from the current draft, that's all. And I'm not saying that if they were carefully, like if those were, I mean, I don't think anyone has a problem with us clarifying some of our terminology, particularly where we get it confused between multiple RFCs over the years. Okay, that's a no-brainer. And sometimes defining a term for something that's always existed, but we didn't have a good word for it, and we were sort of using things like, well, you know, the string plus this string that comes after it. I mean, that's a good thing too. But I think that's very different than creating something that provides further bits of information that transfer over the wire that change what you can do with these things. Which again, I think is probably a good thing to do. I'm not arguing against that, but those are two very different things. And there's not, the second one is not just an update to terminology.
Thank you. I can see discussion in Jabber, someone suggesting that a short-lived working group might be the best kind of solution to this. I'd encourage people to join the queue and give a view on the dispatch question, what's needed for next steps to progress this work. So I can see no one else in the queue, but we've had so far someone suggest it should be, Pete I think suggested AD sponsored or individual submission. Cullen saying to go away and kind of really focus on the scope and what's included, and then some chat about a short-lived working group. So anyone with a final view on this, please come up. We have the discussion time. Let's use it. Yep, John, go for it.
Since you decided you have extra time, Colin said almost everything I was going to say, but let me add to the comment about a special short-lived working group. This is dangerous to do in a working group or even an AD-sponsored document that doesn't have a specific charter and openness to broad participation. People who are involved in this from the standpoint of other work may not want to get involved with core. I agree that looking at the existing document, it's hard to tell what the goals and constraints are, and that points fairly clearly in my mind to a WG, even a very short-lived one. Thanks.
Thank you, John. I don't know if the ADs have a view. AD sponsorship was floated. I can see in the chat someone says in new working group it's overkill for this simple document. And Harold, you've just joined the queue.
And the implications of this document are not simple. Making sure that we don't add any extensions without knowing what we're doing is not simple. The idea that this document is simple is you have not thought this through. I think a working group is recommended.
But by saying that by saying that this is not a simple document, you kind of demonstrate that it's needed.
Yes.
Because everything in there should be simple.
I think the general decision we're coming to here is that some sort of questions about scope and a more clear problem statement would be helpful, and then to revisit this so we can understand exactly what the work is that you're trying to do, and so whether it needs a working group or if the document is a bit more simple. But I think there is general agreement that the work is useful, that we'd like to see the work progress, but just needs a more clear problem statement, and then we can discuss a kind of working group or have a look on how simple the document would be, and then whether it could be AD sponsored instead. So again, I think the best thing to do here is to take discussion further to the list. And I'll discuss with Patrick as well offline and talk about best next steps for this. So thank you very much for the presentation, Carsten, and for the discussion, everyone. Okay. So we next have Ruben or Lars to talk about HTTP content renegotiation. Take it away.
Hi, this is Ruben. So I know the word negotiation is on the slide, but let's not get distracted by that. If you follow the link, the actual proposal we have is as follows. So many APIs on the web, if not most APIs, are actually lying when they communicate. They will tell you that they're serving you JSON or XML. There's only a minority of APIs that will tell you, actually, I'm using this very specific kind of JSON, for instance, like the very specific media types. But most APIs out there will just use very generic media types. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, the problem is that if clients code against such APIs, they're making assumptions that are technically speaking not allowed by the content type. For instance, if the API says, here is JSON, then client's not allowed to assume that a certain specific field called username will be there, for instance, whereas many clients do. And the result from that is that APIs are hard to evolve because clients make certain assumptions. Then when APIs change, you have to version them and so on because those assumptions no longer hold. Now, as I said, a solution that we have is minting very specific content types, but that also comes with drawbacks because there is value in knowing that indeed some format is JSON with some extra assumptions, or some format is XML with some extra assumptions. And in fact, there can be multiple dimensions of assumptions. Like it's not just like one category of assumptions you add, but there can be, for instance, a JSON with a certain navigation section, a certain section about links, with a certain content section, with a username profile, and so on. So that there's like there can be composite of multiple mini standards, if you will, that they can adhere to. So the issue is that today you either have APIs under-specified representation by saying this is JSON, or you almost have to like over-specify, be very specific what it is, but then you kind of lose the fact that it is JSON and can be used in different contexts. So what we've done is we're proposing a document here in which we want to help with a couple of things, four to be specific. On the one hand, we want to help servers indicate what kind of extra constraints the representation conforms to on top of JSON, XML, and so on. We want clients, second, to be able to discover what kind of options exist on the server side, what kind of various constraints that are supported. Then we want clients also to be able to request specific versions, like, hey, yes, I want JSON, but I want it to conform to these and these constraints. And finally, also clients to send representations that have extra constraints. So clients say like, okay, here's JSON, but actually it's subject to these and these other constraints. To do so, we reuse a notion of profiles, which is an existing RFC in which indeed you can say, well, this is JSON plus these and these and these extra constraints. However, I look at profiles, a couple of bits of glue, if you will, what we're missing to make it all work together. Like indicating, for instance, if multiple profiles are supported in representation. Clients asking for specific representations, and also clients indicating that their representation conforms to something. So all of these things were not fully glued together. So the draft that we're currently proposing glues these together using existing mechanisms such as profiles, link hints, and so on. The only new thing we're really introducing here is also a header such that we can have the reactive content negotiation from the server side. So just as you know, the regular content negotiation, but it's only just a small part of the proposal really. What this is ultimately is about is how do we deal with the fact that many content types today are underspecified? How can we allow servers to be more specific about what they have? How can clients be more specific about what they understand and can reuse? And how can clients also send representations that conform to a more specific version of a media type? So this is our draft that we propose. It is adding and gluing up profiles for media types such that servers can keep on communicating in JSON, XML, and so on, as they already do today, but all of the assumptions that clients are making today and which break as APIs evolve to make those explicit in a reusable mechanism that's orthogonal to the rest of the whole stack. So that was in very short my proposal. There's a link on the slides to the full version, which I will also add in chat for your convenience. And I'm happy to hear what you think about it, specifically what the right places within IETF to have these kind of discussions, what you think is useful, and what you need from input from our side to make this happen. So thanks in advance for considering.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'd encourage people to join the queue if you have views on how and where to dispatch this. Patrick and I discussed and we thought maybe HTTP API or HTTP biz would be a suitable venue, but keen to hear your thoughts as well. Mark, go for it.
Hello again. I'm just going to assume you can hear me. I kind of wanted this to come by dispatch personally because there were a lot of unanswered questions about it for me in terms of, well, I know that your use case is primarily APIs. It seems like this is potentially a generic negotiation mechanism, and so that calls into question whether it could be used by other folks. So to be good, I thought it'd be good to get it in front of a broader audience than just the API folks. And I'm also, I guess, just wondering, I mean, this mechanism is something that looks good on paper. I'm just wondering if there are, or at least feasible on paper, I'm wondering if there are API practitioners and implementers who want to be able to do this. And, you know, if they're running up and saying, we tried to use media types, we tried to use the structured suffixes on media types, and it wasn't descriptive enough for what we need to do in our API. And if that's the case, then that's something that would be worth pursuing. But I'm just, you know, popping up a level. I'm very wary of overloading the HTTP API working group with too many work items in its current state right now, when it's just trying to find a community, as it were. So that's kind of where my head's at with this one.
Thank you, Mark. And Chris, you're next in the queue.
All right, so yeah, the question is well put. Does this work outside of HTTP APIs? And I will say that my first thought on reading this was potential applicability in things like indicating whether a given CBOR client understands packed CBOR, or if it needs, you know, unpacked CBOR. And there are a number of situations where it's not just the format, but also what extensions do I support, and that. And so I do think there is some applicability here, but therein also lie dragons. So there's real work to be done here.
Okay, thank you. Timothy Hampton, you're next.
I kind of follow up from the Heavy Dragons thing there. I'm slightly worried that unless you really constrain scope on this.
Sorry, sorted. I don't know if it's just me or if everyone else is getting that. It's quite broken up.
Oh, weird. Okay.
That's better.
So I think it's an odd. I think there's a risk that the Heavy Dragons thing really kicks in, and that so I'd be keen to see a kind of strong restriction on the scope, maybe to try and keep it out of semantics and keep it talking about formats. If you see what I mean, if you see the distinction. So yeah, no, it bothers me that.
Okay, thank you. Rich, you're next. Rich, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Now.
It's better.
Okay. So, so co-chair of the HTTP API group. As Mark had said, we're just trying to figure out what we're doing and getting a community going. It could end up in HTTP API, but I would rather it didn't start right now. Start right away. We've got 5 drafts in progress and a group that is about half new to the IETF, so it might be a little much for this group. And also, it seemed to me when I read the draft that it was much more generic than just, or it could be much more generic than just APIs. Thank you.
Thanks, Rich. And I can see we've got Patrick joining us now as well, so no longer going solo. Patrick, I don't know if you want to just say hi or put you on the spot. Okay, so I'm not hearing any clear signals for whether we want this to go to API or biz. Might be a good idea to just continue the discussion on list and try to find a natural home. But I'll just pause in case there's any further closing thoughts. I can see a couple of things in Jabber just saying it smells like HTTP API work. But maybe I'm not picking up the strongest feeling. To continue discussion, I think, is maybe the outcome we need to talk about it a bit more on list and find a suitable home.
I'm very sorry, Kirsty. I don't find the queue mechanism, and that's probably something wrong. I just want to confirm the point that's been said. Like, we also see it as wider than APIs. I've pitched it from an API perspective now for making the story understandable, but this is indeed a much more generic mechanism as far as we're concerned as well. So just to add to that.
Okay, thank you for the time, and yeah, we'll continue on list. And just for the rest of the session, if you want to join the queue, you just tap the hand icon. Okay, so we're moving into the kind of art section of the agenda now. So we just highlight, as always, a few meetings of interest. So there's a new BOF this week on Dane authentication for IoT service hardening. That's at Friday at 12 o'clock UTC. So obviously modulate for your time zone. And then there are a couple of not new but newish art working groups. So RTC Web has recharted and Wish has been charted, and S-Frame is kind of new as well. So we just highlight those for you. And in other exciting news, Cluster 238 has cleared. So let the party reign. So we just kind of highlight those because it's the start of the week and it's always good to see new work coming in and just things you might be interested in during the week. We've also highlighted a couple of other interesting meetings, all times UTC again. So the RC Editor Future Development Programme and SHMU, staying at home, and as we are right now, meeting only online. That work continues, and then a couple of other dispatchy groups that we always highlight. There's Gen Dispatch, so dispatch for the general area, and Security Dispatch, Sec Dispatch for the security area. And finally, the Iab Open Meeting, which is a newish one, and so also worth having a look. Patrick, I don't know if you want to say anything at this point. We're just kind of recognize, join the meeting.
I really appreciate you setting all this up. So this is terrific. I will mostly listen if I can help out with the queue as we go. I'm happy to. But this is great. Thanks, Kirsty.
No worries. Cool. Thank you. Okay, so we just move into the kind of art area section. So all of these presentations are just kind of like FYIs for your information and to raise awareness of the technology topics. We're not taking dispatching decisions on these. It's just an opportunity to air out the technologies, get some interested folks together, and then follow up with the presenters or the authors of the draft after the session. So first up, we have APN, Application Aware Networking, and I can see we've got people in the queue. So yeah, just take it away.
Hello, Kirsty, can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you and see you.
Okay, thank you. In fact, Shuping now is this is Zhenbin from Huawei. In fact, Shuping now is in the Spring Working Group. I will do the presentation. Okay, this is my first presentation in the art area, because I'm I'm always working in the routing area, but because of the application aware networking work propose much confusing in the IETF, so I would like to do the clarification in the application art area. Okay, next page. Okay, purpose of the presenting in this working group. So in fact, we have the discussion in the APN mailing list regarding the scope of the APN work. The APN is the application aware networking. APN is the abbreviation of the application aware networking. In fact, we want a constraint of the scope of APN to only focus on the network side solution. That is, the application identifier is derived at the network edge instead of the host or the application. So that means if we do like this way, so this is the network side problems instead of is as a application problem regarding the application area. So here we would like to introduce the concept, clarification the scope, and also hope this the people in the art area can understanding the work well. So if you have interest in this work, you can also join the APN mailing list. We can have more across the area communication for better understanding each other. Okay, next slide. Okay, so here we will introduce the APN. So APN is focused on the developing framework and set of mechanism to derive, convey, and use attribute information to allow the implementation of the fine-grained user group or the application group and the service level requirement at the network layer. That means such application-aware information is acquired, constructed, and encapsulated in the packet, and such information is treated as an object in the network. So from this picture, we can see this the application-aware identifier is tagged as the network edge. So this APN will work with a limited trusted domain. That means an APN domain is defined as a service provider's limited domain in which MPRs, VXLAN, segment routing, and other tunnel technologies adopted to provide the service. APN attributes is also tagged and removed at the edge of this limited trusted domain. Okay, next slide. Okay, so according to this, the basic concept of this the APN definition. So here I would like to explain what APN is not. The first, APN is not about identify the application or within the network. That means the network does not need to know which application are sending the traffic. Because the network at the network edge is just to learn this the application group, so that is for the classification, and also because this is telling the network which application are running would also propose this the privacy issue. This is not the scope of this the APN. Kirsty, it seems the Ted in the queue. So I will go on, or Ted, you will propose that's your question firstly.
I think you can proceed with the presentation and we'll take questions at the end. Ted, if that if you're trying to clarify something, feel free to jump in directly.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Okay, Ted, okay, go on. Okay. So the APN is about telling the network what policy to apply the traffic. That means the application can apply multiple policy to different traffic flows. And also the multi-applications can ask for the same policies. So this the policy process means that we need not to for the network to learn the specific application information, but it's just need to classification as a network edge. So, and also in history, there are a lot of similar work that cause the confusion, such as the PAN-RG and SPAD plus or the network token. It has been discussed in the application area or the transport area. But in fact, the APN is different from these works. First, for the SPAD plus and the network token, it focuses on to encapsulate the application information in the host and the application. That means it will not, it does not to encapsulate the information as a network edge. So, so this is the first thing. The second thing, for the SPAD and the plus, it will carry the application information in the transport layer or the application layer. So, but for the APN, it's just to carry this information in the network layer because it's just so specific to the limited network domain. So, in fact, we have a set meeting in the IETF108. So here we do the clarification. And so this is to be sum up. There's convey the information where the transport application layer and the network layer are different technologies. Here, APN use the network layer. Okay, next page. Okay, so here is the YAPN. So we propose this the popular SD1 as the use case. SD1 means the software defined the WAN solutions. So in the case of the SD1, network operators can provide SLA guaranteed WAN lines to help enterprise to access the clouds. When mapping the WAN line into the operator's network, there are usually multiple network paths with different SLA guarantees available between the two endpoints of the tunnel connecting the CPE nodes. In fact, in the MEF, it already defined this the standards related with the SD1. It can add this the CPE. It will use this the 5-tube information to classify this the traffic flow and also steer this the traffic into the different WAN lines. But we know that this is just for the CPE through the different WAN lines. But you know that in the underlay network, there can be multi-paths that can be satisfy the different SLA requirements. But there's no mechanism to communicate the user application requirements to match to the capability of this the path in the underlay WAN network. So in order to cope with this requirement and satisfy this requirement, so that the traffic when goes from the CPE to the underlay WAN network, we need to convey this the application related information to the underlay WAN network. That is as this the head end of the one network. It according to this the application group information and the user group information to steering into corresponding paths to satisfy the SLA requirements. And also in the along this the path in the one network, it can collect the corresponding the performance measurement data for the specific application group or the user group. And also because of the service training process, and also in the one network, it also uses the application group information and also this the user group information for specific service function process. Okay, next slide. Okay, so and here this is take this the issue, propose these issues and the possible solutions. In fact, I already explained these solutions in the previous slides. In fact, there have been some the alternative solutions. For example, some of the solutions proposed in order to facilitate the underlying one network to for the policy process. So it can encapsulate various policies in a list TRV in the head of each packet. When the packet into the one network, it can it can use this the list of the TRV for the policy process. But we know that when you use this the method or use this the 5 tubes in the IP packet, this propose this the challenges because this is the 5 tube information in the payload, but when encapsulate this the tunnel, so that's the nodes along this one network cannot be aware of this the group information. So and also with this IPsec, it is also impossible to obtain this the transport layer information. And also in the IPv6 the data plane, now as this the IPv6 extension header has been widely used. So because of this information, this is the transport layer information for the 5 tube, like this the port number, it will beneath this the IPv6 extension header. It will more difficult for the network node to learn this the information. Okay, next slide. Okay, next page. Okay, so here this is to solve this the issue. So that we can acquire and construct attribute as a network edge and encapsulate it in the packets. So that's such information can be treated as the object in the network. This can bring some this the benefits. So because this use this the one field information instead of the 5 tube information. So this is so this can improve this the scalability, and also use this information. It can provide a very flexible policy enforcement in various nodes and service function along this the network path. Furthermore, with this such information, more new service could be enabled. For example, so that is the policy execution on the service function training can be based on this the application attributes instead of this the 5 tube information. And we can also implement this the more fine granularity performance measurement, and also this the for the SD1. So this underlay performance guarantee can be achieved. So this is just for the new services based on this information. Okay, next slide. Okay. So in fact, so this because this is a specific issue for the limited network domain in the routing area. In fact, in the past years, there are a lot of these the solutions and has been proposed and been adopted. So the first we say that's the DSCP. So that's used for the deep cell, but the fields is not big enough because this is for the more fine granularity. And also in the for the IPv6, there's the IPv6 flow label to identify the different flow, and also use the MPR's entropy label to identify this the flow label. But this is because this always has defined for the specific other usage, so that it cannot used for the identify the application attributes. And also there's the service training, there's a draft for the service ID, and also is to identify this the flow. But this is only encapsulated into the specific NSH encapsulation. It cannot be learned by the nodes, which is not the service function node. And also for this the
I apologize for jumping in. We're going to have to stay on time, and we're down to 4 minutes. So I just wanted to give you a time check to make sure we can get at least a couple of questions in. So perhaps a summary is in order here.
Okay, I will try. Okay, so and also this is just the IOM and binding seed, and also the flow label. This is the portable solutions. I will not introduce details. Okay, next slide. Okay, so now this solution is just the specific scenario. So and also the APN try to propose this the generalized attribute to use for the service provisioning and be carried in various the data plane encapsulation. Next slide. Okay, so now this is the last page, and also this is the question still need to be addressed. So here, this is the security issue. We wanted to learn the more information about this the security issue. And for the privacy issue, we propose this the idea and the concept to mitigate this issue, because this is just use this user group or application group instead of this specific applications, and also use this information as the opaque value. So and also this is just the introduction of the APN. For this the art area, we would like to clarify this scope, and also because we so this is has not directly with this other area, but we would like to learn in the other area about this development trend of the new application, so that according to this, it's better for us to summarize this the requirement of this the new applications for to classify these applications in the different group. So that is my requirement for this the application area. Okay. Patrick, in fact, I would like to state that because the last pages just introduce our progress, I would like to stay in the previous page. I would like to learn the opinion of the experts in the art area. Okay.
I think that's great. I will just remind people that we're in the art area section of the agenda. So our intention, at least today, is not to dispatch any of this work. And with that, should we open for a couple of questions? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can see Ted's in the queue.
Okay. Patrick, before that one, can you go to the page 10? Okay, thanks. Okay. Okay, Ted, please go ahead.
Hi, Junbin. Thanks for your presentation today. A couple of points to clarify. It sounds like, to kind of work backwards, that you don't currently have a specific application that's asking for this functionality. Instead, you're coming to this group to ask if there are applications which would use this functionality. Is that correct?
in fact, for me, sorry. I just for the purpose is just clarify this the scope. That's this we just use that's the classification of this the applicant group, and also that is encapsulated in the network nodes instead of to be encapsulated in the host or the application. Yeah.
The other point I wanted to make was what I saw as a bit of a confusion between slide 3 and slide 4. So if you could go to slide 3 for a moment. So in slide 3, you mentioned that this was something which could possibly was actually slide 2, but let's go on to slide 4. Yeah, user group, application group, and service level requirements. And yet on slide 4, if we go on to that, it seems like at least one of the implementations of this would be a network edge device that's doing inspection. In that case, I was curious to know whether it in fact is a tuple that you're looking for of both the user and the application that the user is looking for, or whether they're groupings that are user specific or groupings which are application specific but do not care what the user is.
Okay, this is a good question, Ted. So here, this in fact for us, for the carrier specific, this is the domain. The first one, I think that we can, according to this the 5-tuple information in the packet for the application group or the user group. So this is just one, this is the possible method. And the second one, because you know that specific user especially for the fixed access user or the wireless access user, because it's always the first to communicate with the network for the authorization for this the user. So that's when it asks for the authorization, so that it can get this the user ID. So that's in the fixed access the network or in the wireless network, it can use this the VLAN ID to identify this user, or for this the course, this the surface group, such as this the multicast or this the unicast. So that's in order for the final granularity. So that is combine this the 5-tuple information, and also this is the other, this is the user or this is the service identification information, so that we can create this the user group information or this is the application group information that be more fine granularity than the 5-tuple of this packet information. Yeah.
Thanks.
Hi, yeah, I'm sorry, we're going to have to cut the discussion here. We've got a very full agenda, so thanks for the presentation, and we'll just take discussion to the list. I see a lot of questions in Jabber as well still to go through, so thank you. Okay, so Robin, you're up next to speak about QLog.
Yeah, all right, thank you for giving me some time to talk about QLog. Next slide. Which stands for quick logging. And this project started about 2 years ago, and we noticed that the new quick and HTTP3 protocols were becoming a bit complex, and we would need some advanced tooling to debug and analyze them. And what you would normally do, next slide, for something like TCP, is you would do a packet capture somewhere in the network, and then you would use tools like Wireshark to analyze what's going on. For Quick, you can, of course, still do that, but it's more difficult. Next slide. Because Quick encrypts almost all of its transport level metadata as well. So to do this, you would have to have an entire packet capture with the packet payload also there, and also the TLS decryption secrets, which can lead you into some trouble in large-scale deployments through scalability and privacy. This is also something that we've already seen for encrypted application layer protocols, of course, which are also difficult to analyze using just Wireshark. There's a second problem here, also long running, which is next slide, which is that not all aspects of a protocol are, of course, sent over the wire. The typical thing in QUIC was the congestion control information, which is, of course, not synced. And so the approach that we proposed for QUIC, next slide, was to, instead of doing things at network level, why not log at the endpoints directly from inside of the implementations, where you have much more control over what you log, so much more privacy sensitive, but you can also log a lot more internal information as well. This is, of course, not a radical new idea. Most implementations have some form of debug logging or output available. But the idea of QLog was to have a single format, single schema that all the different implementations would all follow, which would make it much easier to write reusable tooling and to share data. And so QLog is really quite simple. Next slide. At least for now, we're just using a very straightforward JSON serialization, defining, for example, if you want to log, if you receive a packet, which fields you should log and where they should be, and very similar for example, the congestion control related events that you can see on the right. Using then QLog as an input for tools, next slide. We've also built quite a few QUIC and HTTP3 tools in what is called the QVIS tool suite, giving you things like this, a sequence diagram showing the packets going over the wire and also how they change the internal endpoint state. And next slide. Also, of course, things like this where we can analyze the congestion control behavior in QUIC implementations. Next slide. This approach of having both a format and some reusable tooling has turned out quite interesting for QUIC, leading to the majority of the implementations supporting the format. One of the main ones is Facebook. We're actually deploying this at scale to analyze their HTTP3 deployment, and that seems to be working quite well. And so because of this, the fact that it seems to be worth the effort, this has so far been 2 individual drafts. Next slide. We are now looking to adopt those within the QUIC working group as part of the upcoming recharter over the coming months. And one of the main goals there is, of course, to finalize all of this for QUIC and HTTP3. But a secondary goal is to look if we can actually generalize this to more protocols, of course. And that is one of the main reasons that I'm here today, to make sure more people are aware of that, because it might impact some of you down the line. Because the whole idea of QLog is again, quite simple. It's just logging things in a standard way inside of the implementations directly, which can, of course, be useful for other things. I've listed here a couple of projects where people are concretely working on them, or at least thinking about using a similar approach. And I wanted to highlight that it's not just even the protocols themselves, but also some higher level logic as well. There is one project looking at adding, for example, adaptive bitrate algorithm decisions into the same logs as where you have the QUIC layer congestion control information, hopefully making it easier to correlate and debug these complex interactions. This goal of expanding QLog is actually already a little bit in there. Next slide. As we'll see, there are two different drafts. One deals with the QUIC and HTTP3 events specifically, but the other one is called the main schema, and that kind of includes all of the protocol agnostic stuff that we might need. And the hope is that eventually this will turn into, let's say, a framework or a set of guidelines and best practices that you can use to define new QLog schemas for different protocols down the line. Next slide. Of course, doing that comes with plenty of challenges. It's not going to be that straightforward as I would like. And I wanted to highlight three of these, the top 3 ones, just to give you an idea of the type of discussion that we will probably have. Next slide. So the first one is what the event definitions should actually look like. A very straightforward thing to do is just map the wire image, wire serialization as we see fit into, for example, JSON, which is what you see here. But for example, here we have an acknowledgement. Oh no, sorry. Here we have an acknowledgement frame on the left that is missing the acknowledgements for packet number 16, which doesn't immediately mean that the implementation also marks packet number 16 as lost. This typically takes a few negative acknowledgements. And so what you need is what is now shown on the right side is actually a second type of event, actually reflecting what has happened at the implementation itself to cover all of these use cases. You can make arguments for either or of these types of events, but in reality, you would need both. So that's a lot of work defining all of those, and especially for the people making tools, because now you suddenly have different event types having overlapping data. What if they contradict? Which one takes precedence, and so on and so forth. And that's even if we just stay within a single protocol, because if we go to the next slide, TCP, for example, of course, also has the concept of selective acknowledgements, but there they are in the TCP packet header inside of the options. So it's the exact same concept, the exact same data, but reflected in a different form of schema. And so making tools that, for example, work across TCP and QUIC and other protocols becomes more difficult if we would take a naive approach. A second challenge in the next slide is the concrete serialization format. We've been using JSON mainly because it's flexible and it's well supported, but it's not the most performant format across the board, of course. And so we've tried to make the QLog drafts serialization format agnostic by having like a custom data type definition language for the events, which is what you can see on the right side there. It's something very loose that is not well defined, and so we would prefer to switch this to something more well defined, which I know is present at the IETF. I just don't have enough experience choosing the correct one, in the hopes that we can automatically generate serializers and deserializers for these formats in different programming languages and contexts. One of the important things there, I think, driving these decisions would be how people will actually plan to use this type of log, for example, file-based or streaming-based, and how they will ingest this information. The next slide. Finally, a very big challenge, I think, is privacy. As we said, conceptually, of course, it's very easy to leave out privacy-sensitive information at the endpoints. However, in some debugging use cases, you, of course, still need those IP addresses or those URLs that you're going to be logging. And so the current approach, proposed approach, is to use different sanitization levels, going from relatively loose to very strict, defining which fields you can include or how they should be encoded or hashed, that kind of stuff, to have very concrete guidelines there. And my hopes, at least, is that at least the very sanitized versions might then lead to larger open source data sets, for example, for research, or allowing, for example, your customers to download QLogs from individual connections to, for example, help debug server-side problems there. Whether or not that's actually a good idea in practice, I'm going to leave on the table, but it's one of those potential use cases that we might think of using QLog for. So the final slide. In summary, what I hope and think will eventually maybe happen is that we would have a separate QLog working group managing these main guidelines. If it turns out that this is indeed something that is feasible, because we don't even know if it's that good of an idea to do this for all the protocols at the same time, or which additional challenges we might face. And that new working group then will interface with other working groups to define particular schemas for different protocols. But as for in the future, for now, for practical reasons mainly, we are keeping all of this within the QUIC working group, mainly focusing on QUIC and H3, but still discussing these type of aspects, hoping to prepare something that makes QLog usable for different things down the line. So this work will start happening in the next couple of months. If you really can't wait, you can already join us on GitHub. And of course, I'm very happy to answer any questions or listen to feedback you have now as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin, for the presentation. Yeah, let's open up the queue. If anyone's got comments or feedback or questions, I can see Jabba's quite lively, so you've certainly got a group of folks interested. Philip Hallenbaker, off you go.
I think you're muted, Philip.
You have to unmute both. Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah. I was just going to put down a marker if you do start forming a working group. I want to encrypt my log files. I want to be able to have a standard format for doing that. you know, we've got the message that all data should be encrypted on the wire. It's about time we started encrypting the data at rest as well. And the log files are really sensitive information, and it should be encrypted, GDPR, etc., etc. So just putting down a marker that I am working on doing that at the moment. I'm using QLog as the schema for the payload of my packets, but I'm looking at encrypting the whole thing.
I agree that would be useful. Yeah, thank you.
Oh, and it's in incremental encryption, so that when you don't want to do a key exchange on every log entry, that would be silly.
Mark Nottingham, join the queue.
Hey, so I'm not against this work in any way. I think it's great and it's necessary that this happen. I'm just wondering what it becoming a standard brings to the table, because in many other places, things like this kind of operational infrastructure and logging formats are done in an ad hoc or open source fashion. And indeed, I think from your slides, you have a pretty strong market share already just from, coordination in that kind of fashion. So it's not that I'm saying this should not be a standard, but I'm just wondering what it brings to the table. And I made the remark in Jabber, we don't standardize APIs in the IETF for lots of different reasons. I wonder if this has some of the same properties as an API in terms of defining latent behaviors of implementations that we wouldn't want to standardize. Just kind of an open thought there. But so that I'm not saying don't do this. Just I wonder why we're here.
Yep. Fair enough. Question has been asked several times, and I'm also not sure that this should be done myself. I just look at things like IPFix or NetFlow and see some similarities and see that work has found quite a bit of work in the IETF. So maybe this could fit as well.
Thank you. Ben Schwartz.
Hi. I think that I feel like we've sort of lost a tradition here. Like once upon a time, the IETF used to standardize more file formats. In my somewhat ill-educated opinion, it seems like we've gotten out of the habit. But I do think that there's value there, and to Mark's point, I think the one really important thing will be to figure out where the edges of your standardization domain are, and make space for non-standard information to be mixed into this kind of log.
That's actually one of the main reasons we're using JSON right now, because it's very easy to add implementation or deployment specific events, which is also something that has happened a lot in practice.
Thank you. DKG.
I'm going to try this again. I don't know if my audio is working. Great.
We can hear you.
Thanks. So I think there is value in standardizing this. I think it's actually a mistake to think that the IETF doesn't standardize APIs. We have standardized APIs in the past and file formats. So I agree with Ben about that. I think part of the value here, there's obvious interoperability value, right? In that it's possible to debug implementations and figure out when there are problems, what's going on in them. And that's a big gain. The second reason that it's good to standardize this sort of stuff is the standardization process is a place for implementers to think clearly about the impact of some of these things, right? Including the privacy concerns that were mentioned earlier in the presentation. Identifying, hey, these fields are particularly sensitive. If you're going to log this stuff, we might recommend, data retention or destruction policies for data that is at this particular level of sensitivity, or we we recommend that you don't log this stuff at all unless you happen to have errors in this particular domain. I'm scared about the idea of automatic retention of keylog data in the quantities of gigabytes in the way that one of the slides mentioned. I don't want to encourage that to happen. But I think if we don't actually talk about the format specifically, we can't even have the conversation about what are best practices here. So I think this is interesting and looks like useful work.
Cool, thank you for the comments. I can see a lot of chat sort of saying that this is, interesting work, and that the standardization of the log form seems like a good idea. So yeah, this is a kind of FYI. Let's continue discussion, and thank you so much, Robin, for the presentation. You've provided a lot of links for folks who are interested to go forward and get involved with it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, cool. So up next we have James presenting his draft. Take it away, and I'll drive.
Good afternoon. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, yeah, we can hear you.
Cool. Hello. So on the mailing list a couple of weeks ago, I sort of put a call out to get some attention on this, on a draft that I've been worked on all the way back in Singapore, and then sat on it for a very long time due to procrastination and other priorities. Next slide, please. What is the problem I'm trying to solve? Well, I use SDP a lot for signaling various media workflows inside of and outside of the context that I think a lot of other people use it in terms of inside of SIP and all the rest of it. And this draft tries to describe it inside of HTTP, so could be used like that. The other thing that this draft is trying to eventually solve is having the ability to signal media where HTTP is the control, so to speak. Next slide, please. So this is basically it. I'm going to breeze through this. So I effectively take the SDP data model and apply it to HTTP header semantics. I'm using structured headers to do this. I'm using the latest SDP RFC for doing it. And I have not yet got a very clear answer to all of the parts of the media, which is something that Adam Roach had raised on mailing list. Basically, I can describe the basics of it, and what I'm hoping out of this discussion is, or at least your feedback, is what we should do with this and how what that might look like. Next slide. So just a really dumb, naughty example of what this looks like out there. In my real world implementations, it looks something very similar to this. Next slide. So originally we were talking about dispatching this. Chairs have been very kind to encourage me to present this. There are a few places that this could go, and I can see that Jabber has already mentioned some of these names. I'm not asking for where should this go, but I'm also more importantly asking for is this worth doing? Because although I've scratched my own back with it, it's one of those things where if nobody else has interest in it, it's probably not worth pursuing. That's it. Is there any feedback that people have?
Thank you for the presentation, James. Thanks for bringing it just to get a few eyes on it. And yeah, we'll open up the queue if anyone has comments or thoughts on the proposal, other places it could go, or just any feedback generally. Please step up. Yeah, I could just see in Jabber, problem statement sounds like wish. Mark Nottingham saying it seems out of scope for HTTP API. I'd encourage folks to get up to the mic if you want to have questions and chat. Eric Riscola.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, it seems like there's two things here. One is a re-serialization of the HTTP API in, sorry, the SDP format in structured header, which is like, SDP, like not ng minus minus. And then the other is, hey, we're going to stuff in HTTP headers. And, I think to recap Adam's comment, I mean, like SDP is really complicated, and I'm like sort of trying to get like Walla is an enormous pain to write an SDP parser. Like I'm because I'm like not really persuaded that like it's that valuable to put it in structured headers as opposed to in a new structured format. Like I don't see like that generally being adoptable. Like for the purpose of putting the header, like if all the problem is you want to get in the header, just base HT for
it. Okay, that's fair feedback. I don't have an intelligent enough response to it.
Okay, anyone else, any comments in the queue? Otherwise, we'll just continue the lively discussion that I've seen on the list. And thank you again, James, for taking the time to come and present your work to us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're on to our final item on the art agenda. Jonathan Rosenberg, I think you're presenting Draft Rosenberg.
All right. Hopefully folks can hear me and see me. Yes?
Yep, we can hear and see you, yep.
All right. These days, that's a hard problem. Okay. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to talk about this draft. Next slide. Going to go real quick so we can have time for discussion and comments. To say up front, by the way, I'm not looking for dispatch. This is merely letting people know about this draft and looking for interested folks to participate with us. The problem we're trying to solve is to build highly reliable voice systems in cloud-based environments. We have tons and tons of back-to-back user agents, often with media widely deployed in server and data center environments, full state, whether that's SRTP state, RTP state, SDP state, lots of low-level SIP state, making high availability hard. Two things there. One is, hey, if a server instance fails, can you allow new calls to succeed? And the much more tricky one, which is the focus of this draft, is, hey, if I've got an SBC or a soft switch and it fails, how can I actually make it so that the call doesn't drop? That's hard. That's not as commonly implemented. It's sometimes done with IP takeover solutions with a lot of state replication, but that's not really amenable to cluster deployments. So the goal of this draft is to enable high availability in clusters of B2B UAs that usually serve media, although not limited to that. Next slide. I'm not going to go through this. It's out of the document, but we basically want to recover a call in 2 seconds. We want to support elastic expansion, contraction of clusters in cloud environments, and using that to make sure we can achieve HA. Active calls can get spread across remaining nodes in a cluster and support things like graceful shutdown. Next slide. The basic architecture looks like this. You've got this idea that there's a cluster of instances, whether that's a soft switch or an SBC or whatever. You've got N of them. They have some kind of shared database just outside the scope of this document. And the idea is to recognize this notion of a cluster and to introduce requirements that need to be implemented by the upstream calling server, which can be another B2B UA or a bunch of different type of things, soft switches or whatever. And the calling server is doing SIP and RTP load balancing across the instances. And more importantly, when one of those instances fail, we want to define processes and handling for the calling server to sort of recover that call. And the last bit of what's in here is, in order for this to work, we need a way to propagate information about this cluster, the set of instances, their IPs and ports, their relative capacities to the upstream calling server in real time, super fast, to deal with different HA situations. And then next slide. So the actual solution mechanism is not complicated, actually, and this is largely just requiring usage of specs we mostly already have. The only really newish thing is a JSON object format for pushing configuration of cluster members to this calling server. But beyond that, sort of recommending techniques like SIP options, pings, and RTP timeouts were already widely used for rapid failure detection, and then really mandating the implementation of invite with replaces as a specific way to sort of reconstitute the state. So if an instance fails, we want the calling server to send an invite with replaces to a different live instance in that cluster. That instance can, just using the dialog identifiers, rebuild the call, generate a downstream invite if needed, using invite with replaces, and up we go. And to do all that in like less than 2 seconds, so that people don't hang up the call. So that's basically the solution. Like I said, not looking to form a working group, mostly call for input. The goal is to sort of do some prototyping and vet this out, do some demos, validate it works, particularly in cloud environments. And then, once we have some implementations, we'll come back to explore standardization, but looking for implementers. Questions or feedback?
So come up and join the queue if you'd like to ask any clarifying questions or give your view on this. We'll just pause, give folks a second to find the raise hand at the top of the screen.
What? No comments or questions? Come on, guys. Do you really still want to talk about SDP-NG? This is more interesting. All right.
Shots fired, but I think, yeah, you've got no...
That's fine. Well, if anyone is interested in working with us on this, again, if you're an SBC, got SBCs, got soft switches, conference bridges, this is going to massively help the reliability of your solution. So you know where to find me. Thanks, everyone.
A late entrance to the queue is Jonathan Lennox.
Yeah, so I guess my question is how much of the existing SIP would need to support invite with replaces? Is it just the immediately upstream SBC, or are you saying that everything in the whole world needs to suddenly support invite with replaces? Because one of those seems certainly a much easier lift than the other.
Yeah, that's a great question. So it is the upstream element from the cluster and the downstream element from the cluster. And the use cases are sort of pretty fairly narrowly constrained for this app. They're not meant for, the fundamental assumption is that the downstream UA is under the same administrative control of the entity that runs the cluster. If that's not the case, this spec is not applicable. So the only thing the spec is asking is upstream. So the main real, and this is why I want a standard, is like, hey, if I'm running a cloud voice network and I want my carrier to support invite replaces on their SBC, I'm covered, I'm good with my soft switches and my whatever is, but I just need the upstream guy to do it. That's really all this is asking. Great question.
Great, thank you. Well, thanks for the presentation, Jonathan. We'll continue the discussions on list, and thanks for presenting. So we'll just, we reached the end of our formal agenda, so I'll just do a wrap up, having discussed with Patrick as well. Now we can just wrap up the dispatch stuff concretely and say the summary is that we think the date time work needs a short-lived working group. So we'll just post on a list about that, and it seems to be uncontroversial, so we think probably a BOF is not needed, but we'll just continue the discussion on list about that. With the media types work from Carsten, we agree it's a simple document, but it's still likely to, not be as simple as we would hope. So we think a working group is needed, and we'll discuss and clarify the scope and the problem on list, and then it might be resulting in a BOF. And then for the HTTP negotiation work, it sounds HTTP API destined, but just a bit more discussion on list required to confirm. And the chairs, me and Patrick, we will post and start that discussion. So just wanted to wrap that up. And then hand over to Murray. We've got, if you want to just say a few words, that'd be grand. Thanks.
How's the audio?
Flawless.
Flawless. I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank Barry for his work supporting dispatch and also supporting me as a new AD and Francesca as a new AD. This is his last meeting as on our area director. So thank you very much, Barry.
Barry, your audio is not working, I'm afraid. But I'll just use this silence to also thanks.
It's the mute button that didn't work. There was some lag on it. Anyway, thanks, Murray, and thanks everybody in the art area for the support you've given me as AD. I've been thrilled working with you guys, and I will continue to work with you as working group chair somewhere and other such things. That's it.
Yay.
Thank you, Barry.
Thanks, Barry. Okay, so we just have a few minutes left if anyone has any AOB to bring up. Otherwise, we will close the meeting out and give you a little bit more break time. You can see a lot of thanks and applause for Barry in the chat, so I think that's a lovely place to leave it. Thanks everyone for your conversation and contributions today, and thanks to all our speakers as well. What a great start to the week. Take care, bye.